I returned to Harbor Pines expecting a celebration, or at least the job I had spent a decade earning. Instead, I found my inheritance signed over to my little sister and a suffocating silence in the kitchen. When I finally demanded the truth, my mother didn't apologize. She just looked through me and said, "If you knew what your father did to keep this place alive, you wouldn't be asking questions." The diploma in my passenger seat was still in its stiff cardboard mailer. It was heavy, expensive, and completely invisible to the people I was driving home to see. For the last 2 years, I had been living a double life in Chicago. By day, I was a project manager for a logistics firm that moved steel across the Midwest, and by night, I was a ghost haunting the study halls of the university. Grinding through an MBA that I had paid for with sleepless nights and loans I was too proud to tell my parents about. I was 32 years old. I had no husband, no children, and an apartment that looked more like a storage unit than a home. But I had this degree, and I had a plan. The plan was simple. I would drive 3 hours north to Harbor Pines, Michigan. I would sit through a dinner of pot roast and polite conversation. I would place the degree on the table, not as a boast, but as a key. Then I would look my father in the eye and tell him I was finally ready to come home and run Patterson Marine Supply. I turned off the highway and the landscape shifted. The sharp, vertical ambition of Chicago dissolved into flat fields and then into the dense, pine-heavy claustrophobia of northern Michigan. Harbor Pines was a town that existed in a permanent state of damp gray. It was built on lumber and kept alive by the marina. A place where summer tourists docked pristine white yachts next to rusted trawlers that had been pulling whitefish out of the lake for 50 years. My father, Dale Patterson, owned the place that kept those boats running. Patterson Marine was not just a shop, it was the anchor of the harbor, and for as long as I could remember, it was supposed to be mine. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the tree line. The house was a sprawling split level that had not been painted since I was in high school. My mother's hydrangeas were blooming in aggressive blue clusters along the porch. Fighting a losing war against the overgrown ivy, when I walked inside, the smell hit me. Pot roast, onions, and the faint, underlying scent of lemon polish. It was the smell of a house where nothing ever changed. "Surprise," I said. Though I had told them I was coming, my mother, Marilyn, came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel. She looked older. The lines around her mouth were deeper, etched by a specific kind of Midwestern stoicism that viewed smiling as a luxury. "Leah," she said, "you made good time." She hugged me, but it was the kind of hug that involved more patting than squeezing. A check-in, not an embrace. Dale was in the living room, sitting in his recliner with the local paper spread across his lap. He didn't stand up. He just lowered the paper and looked at me over his reading glasses. "There she is," he said, "the scholar." I smiled, fighting the urge to feel like a teenager again. "Hi, Dad." And there was Kendra. My sister was sitting on the floor by the coffee table, sorting through a stack of mail. She was 29 but looked younger, dressed in a faded sweatshirt and jeans. Kendra had never left. While I ran to the city to prove I was tough enough to survive without them, Kendra had stayed. She had stayed for the slow seasons, the bad winters, and the Sunday dinners. "Hey, Lee," she said. She didn't look up. I put the cardboard mailer on the dining table. "I officially finished," I said. "Top 10% of the class." "That's nice, honey," my mother said, heading back into the kitchen. "Wash up. We are eating in 10 minutes. That was it. 2 years of agony. Summarized as nice. Dinner was a study in avoidance. We sat at the same oak table where I had done my homework for 18 years. My father ate with mechanical precision. Cutting his meat into perfect squares, Kendra pushed her peas around her plate. The conversation stayed aggressively shallow. We talked about the weather. We talked about the neighbors. We talked about the price of gas. "So," I said, seizing a lull in the silence, "now that I am back, I want to come by the shop tomorrow morning. I have some ideas. I learned a lot about supply chain efficiency that could really help with the inventory issues we talked about at Christmas." My father chewed slowly. He did not look at me. He looked at his fork. "Tomorrow is a busy day," he said. "I know." I said, "That is why I want to come in early. I can get started on the accounts." Kendra dropped her fork. It clattered against the china, a sharp, violent sound in the quiet room. "Sorry," she mumbled. Marilyn stood up abruptly. "Who wants pie?" "I have cherry." I looked from my father to my sister. The air in the room had changed. It had gone thick, heavy with something unsaid. "Dad?" I asked. "We will talk later." "Leah," he said. His voice was final. "Eat your pie." I slept in my old room that night, surrounded by debate trophies and dusty paperbacks. I told myself I was imagining the tension. They were just old-fashioned. They didn't understand that business wasn't just about hard work anymore. It was about strategy. I would show them. I would walk into that shop tomorrow and prove my worth. I woke up early, before the rest of the house was stirring. I dressed in a suit, perhaps too formal for a marine supply shop, but I wanted to send a message. I was not the daughter coming to help out. I was the manager coming to take charge. The drive to the marina was short. The fog was still rolling off the lake, obscuring the masts of the sailboats bobbing in the harbor. Patterson Marine Supply sat at the end of the main pier, a long, corrugated metal building that smelled of diesel, algae, and wet wood. I parked my car and walked to the front entrance. The sign above the door was new. The old hand-painted lettering was gone, replaced by a sleek, vinyl banner that looked generic and corporate. Patterson Marine. The supply had been dropped. I frowned and pushed through the door. Inside, the shop felt wrong. Usually, the morning atmosphere at Patterson's was loud, mechanics shouting over the hum of generators, the radio playing classic rock, customers arguing good-naturedly about parts. Today, it was quiet. The radio was off. The guys at the counter were speaking in low murmurs. I walked past the rows of shelves stocked with cleats, rope, and engine parts. The inventory looked thin. There were gaps on the shelves that my father never would have tolerated. "Hey, Miss Leah." I turned to see Tom Gathers, the floor manager. Tom had worked for my father since before I was born. He was a giant of a man, his hands permanently stained with grease. "Hi, Tom," I said, smiling. "Good to see you." "You too," he said. He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned in. "We didn't know you were coming back so soon." "I just graduated," I said. "Figured it was time to get to work." Tom nodded, but his eyes darted toward the back office, the glass-walled office that overlooked the shop floor. "My father's office." "Well, that is good," Tom said. "Kendra is going to need the help. Big job she has got now." I paused. "What do you mean?" Tom looked confused. "You know, taking over. She has been in the big office all week." My stomach dropped. A cold, hard stone formed in my gut. "What?" "Yeah," Tom said, oblivious to the fact that he was currently destroying my life. "We were all real happy for her. It is a lot for a young girl, being the owner and all, but she is a trooper. Owner," the word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. I walked away from Tom without another word. I marched straight toward the back office. The door, which had always been kept propped open with a heavy brass propeller, was closed. I tried the handle. Locked. I stared at the wood. My father never locked this door. He said a locked door told the customers you had something to hide. I knocked. Sharp. 3 raps. There was a shuffling sound inside, and then the door opened. But it wasn't Kendra. It was my father. He looked tired. His face was gray, his eyes rimmed with red. He was wearing his work shirt, but it looked loose on him, as if he had lost 10 pounds since Christmas. "Leah," he said. He didn't move to let me in. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "Why did Tom just tell me that Kendra is the owner?" He sighed. A long, deflating sound. He stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. I heard the lock click. "Not here," he said. He walked past me, out the side door that led to the dock. I followed him. The morning air was cold, biting through my blazer. We stood by the water, looking out at the gray horizon. Is it true? I asked. It is temporary, he said. He didn't look at me. He watched a seagull picking at a dead fish on the pilings. Temporary? I repeated. You transferred ownership? That is a legal process. Dad, that isn't like lending someone your car. It was practical. He said. His voice was hard, defensive. You were in Chicago. You were busy with your school. You were never around. Leah, I was never around because I was getting the degree you told me I needed. I shouted. The sound echoed off the water. I did this for us. For the business. You did it for yourself. He snapped. He turned to face me finally. You wanted the fancy title. You wanted the city. Kendra was here. She was here every day, sweeping the floors, doing the books, dealing with the customers, doing the books. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Kendra barely passed algebra. Dad, you know she can't run this place, not the way it needs to be run. She is doing fine, he said. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why let me drive all the way here, with my degree in the car, thinking I was coming home to my job? I didn't want to distract you from your finals, he said. It was a weak lie. We both knew it. I want to see the papers. I said, no. He said, excuse me? You don't need to see the papers. It is done. It is a family decision. I am family, I yelled. You are a visitor. Leah, he said. And that hurt more than the lie. He started to walk back toward the building. I caught his arm. He flinched, pulling away as if my touch burned him. Dad, what is going on? This doesn't make sense. Why the new sign? Why is the inventory so low? Why is the office locked? Go home to your mother, he said. I have work to do. He left me standing on the dock, shivering in the cold. I didn't go home. I got in my car and drove around the town for an hour, screaming silently behind the glass. I drove past the high school, past the library, past the empty lot where the old cinema used to be. Everything looked the same, yet everything had shifted. I had been erased. When I finally returned to the house, my mother was in the garden. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and aggressive gardening gloves, pruning the roses with a violence that seemed unnecessary. She saw me and didn't stop clipping. Snip, snip, snip. You talked to him, she said. It wasn't a question. I stood on the walkway. He gave the business to Kendra. Yes. Why? She stopped then. She turned to me. Holding the shears, the blades glinted in the sunlight. Leah, she said, you are smart. You have always been the smart one. You have your degree. You can go anywhere, do anything. I want to be here. I said, this was the plan. Plans change, she said. That's not an answer. Mom, why Kendra? She hates the business. She has talked about moving to Florida for 5 years. Why would she want this? Because she is a good daughter, Marilyn said. The implication hung there. And you are not. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and humiliating. I am a good daughter. I worked my tail off to be ready for this. You left, she said simply. I came back. You are here now. She said, but for how long? Until a better offer comes along in Chicago? Until you get bored of this small town? This isn't about me leaving. I said. I stepped closer. Dad looks sick. Mom, he looks terrible. And the shop? It felt weird. There is something you aren't telling me. Marilyn's face hardened. She took a step toward me, invading my personal space. She smelled of rosewater and fear. If you knew what your father did to keep this place alive, you wouldn't be asking questions, she hissed. The intensity of her voice shocked me. It wasn't anger. It was panic. What did he do? I whispered, Go inside, Leah, she said, turning back to her roses. Just go inside. I went to my room and sat on the bed. My mind was racing. If you knew what your father did, it wasn't just favoritism. My father was a proud man, but he was also a logical one, handing a complex marine supply business to Kendra, who panicked when she had to calculate a tip at a restaurant. Was not logical. It was desperate. I waited until nightfall. The house was quiet. My parents went to bed early. a habit born of decades of waking up at 5 in the morning. Kendra's room was down the hall, next to mine. I crept out of my room. I needed to know. If they wouldn't tell me, I would find out. I went downstairs to the kitchen. My father kept a satchel he brought back and forth from work. It usually sat on the bench by the back door. It was there, a battered leather messenger bag that he had owned for 20 years. I opened the flap. It was mostly empty, a thermos, a bag of mints, a newspaper, but at the bottom, there was a handful of trash. My father had a habit of cleaning out his pockets into his bag and forgetting about it. I pulled out a crumpled receipt from the gas station, a wrapper from a sandwich, and then a small pile of shredded paper. It looked like someone had torn an envelope in half, then quarters, then eighths, and shoved it in a pocket. I took the pieces to the kitchen table and turned on the small light over the stove. I pieced them together like a jagged puzzle. It wasn't a complete document. It was just the window portion of an envelope and the corner of a letter. The logo was blue and gray, a stylized pillar, Northbridge Capital Solutions. I didn't recognize the name. We banked with Harbor Pines Community Bank. We had for 40 years. Below the logo, on a separate scrap of paper that had been inside the envelope, I made out 3 words in bold red font. Notice of default. My heart hammered against my ribs. Default. Patterson Marine was debt-free. That was my father's golden rule. You never buy what you can't pay for in cash. If we were in default, that meant there was a loan I knew nothing about. I pulled out my phone and searched for Northbridge Capital Solutions. The results were vague. A landing page with stock photos of handshakes and skyscrapers. No address listed. Just a P.O. box in Delaware. Specialists in distressed asset restructuring and bridge financing. Distressed assets. I felt sick. My father hadn't just given the business to Kendra. He had given her a sinking ship. Suddenly, I heard a voice. It was coming from upstairs. I froze, sweeping the scraps of paper into my hand and shoving them into my pajama pocket. I crept to the bottom of the stairs. It was Kendra. She was in the hallway, her voice low and frantic. She must have thought everyone was asleep. I moved up the stairs, skipping the step that squeaked. I crouched in the shadows of the landing. Kendra was standing outside her bedroom door, her phone pressed to her ear. "I can't do that," she whispered. Her voice was thick with tears. She listened for a moment, shaking her head. "No, she doesn't know," Kendra said. She thinks Dad just picked me. She is mad, but she doesn't know." Pause. "I can't kick her out. She is my sister." Pause. "He won't talk to her. He promised." Then she went silent for a long time. I could hear the faint murmur of a voice on the other end of the line, male and aggressive, but I couldn't make out the words. "No, she can't see the files," Kendra whispered, her voice trembling. "If she does, she'll blow everything up." She hung up the phone and leaned her forehead against the doorframe. I held my breath, pressing myself into the darkness. Kendra stood there for a minute, wiping her eyes, before slipping back into her room and closing the door. I stayed on the landing, my heart racing so fast I thought they would hear it through the floorboards. She'll blow everything up. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a loan. My family was hiding something that terrified them. They were protecting me, or they were protecting themselves. But the result was the same. I was on the outside. I went back to my room and locked the door. I took the scraps of paper out of my pocket and laid them on the nightstand. Northbridge Capital Solutions. I looked at my diploma sitting on the dresser, the fancy paper, the gold seal. It felt useless now. My father didn't need a manager. He needed a lawyer. But he wouldn't let me help. He had walled me out. He had put Kendra in the line of fire to keep me safe, or to keep me blind. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house felt heavy, pressing down on me. I realized then that the graduation dinner, the awkwardness, the temporary excuse, it was all a performance. A play put on to keep me from seeing the stage collapsing beneath our feet. They wanted me to leave. They wanted me to take my degree and my wounded pride and drive back to Chicago. But I wasn't going anywhere. I was a Patterson. And Patterson women didn't walk away from a fight, even if the people they were fighting were the ones they loved the most. Tomorrow, I wouldn't go to the shop. I wouldn't beg my father for answers he wouldn't give. I would go to the one person in this town who couldn't lie to me. I would find out what Northbridge Capital Solutions really was, and I would find out why my father was willing to destroy his family to keep them secret. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I just listened to the wind rattling the window panes, sounding like a warning. The next morning, the house was silent again. My father had left for the shop before sunrise. Marilyn was in the kitchen, aggressively kneading dough. "Leaving today?" she asked without turning around. I poured myself a cup of coffee. "No," I said. "I think I will stay a few days. Catch up with some friends." Marilyn stopped kneading. Her shoulders tensed. "Leah, don't linger," she said. "It just makes it harder." "Harder for whom?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just went back to the dough, punching it down with a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. I drank my coffee black. It tasted bitter. "I'm going out," I said. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I didn't turn toward the marina. I turned toward the center of town. I needed to find Avery. Avery Nunez had been my best friend since kindergarten. We had been inseparable until I left for college and she stayed behind to take care of her grandmother. We had drifted apart, the way childhood friends do when their lives take different shapes. But we still sent Christmas cards. I knew she was working as a paralegal now. I had seen it on social media. I parked in front of the small brick building that housed the law offices of Henderson Associates. It was the only real law firm in Harbor Pines, handling everything from DUIs to property disputes. I walked in. The reception area was empty, but I heard typing from the back. "Hello?" I called out. A head popped up from a cubicle. It was Avery. She looked exactly the same. Wild curly hair, bright glasses, a smile that took up half her face. "Leah!" she screamed. She ran around the desk and hugged me. This was a real hug. Squeezing, breathless, warm. "Oh my God. Look at you. Ms. MBA," Avery said, pulling back to look at me. "I thought you weren't coming back until the weekend." "I got in last night," I said. "So, you are here. For how long? We have to get drinks. We have to catch up. Actually," I said, lowering my voice, "I need a favor. A work favor." Avery's smile faded slightly. She looked at my face, really looked at me, and saw the tension I couldn't hide. "What is it?" she asked. "I need to know how to transfer a business." I said, specifically, how to do it without notifying a family member who is supposed to inherit it. Avery's eyes widened. "Oh, yeah," I said. "Oh, come back here," she said, gesturing to her cubicle. I sat in the guest chair. Avery sat down and spun her chair to face me. "Okay," she said. "Tell me everything." I told her. The dinner, the locked office, the employee's comment, the shredded notice, Kendra's phone call. When I finished, Avery looked grim. "Leah, that isn't just weird," she said. That is strategic." "Strategic how?" "If your dad transferred the business to Kendra, and he did it quietly, it means he wanted to bypass any waiting periods or discussions. It means he wanted the liability to shift, fast." "Liability?" I asked. "If the business is in trouble," Avery said, leaning in, "real trouble. Sometimes people move assets to protect them, or they move them to protect themselves." "But why Kendra?" I asked. "She doesn't know anything about the business." "Maybe that is the point," Avery said softly. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "If you need someone to sign papers they don't understand. You don't pick the daughter with the MBA," Avery said. "You pick the one who trusts you blindly." I stared at her. The thought was too dark to fully process. My father loved us. He wouldn't use Kendra. But then I remembered the shredded envelope. Notice of default. "Avery," I said, "can you look up Northbridge Capital Solutions?" "I can try," she said. "But if they are a private lender, There might not be much on the public record. Just try. Please. She turned to her computer and started typing. I watched her screen, the reflection of the cursor blinking in her glasses. Leah, she said after a moment. What? This isn't a bank. She said, it is a predatory lender, high risk, short-term commercial loans. They are known for loan-to-own schemes. Loan-to-own? They lend money to businesses that are desperate, she explained. But the terms are impossible when the business defaults. They don't just want the money back. They want the collateral. They want the business. I felt the blood drain from my face. So my dad? He borrowed money from sharks. Leah. And now they are circling. And Kendra? If she is the owner, Avery said, looking at me with pity. Then she is the one on the hook. I stood up. The room felt too small. I have to go, I said. Leah, wait, Avery called, but I was already moving. I had to get back to the house. I had to stop this. My father hadn't given the business to Kendra as a gift. He had given it to her as a sacrifice. And I was going to burn the whole thing down before I let that happen. The morning air in Harbor Pines was heavy with a damp chill that settled into your bones and stayed there. I sat in my car outside the small, brick-faced building that housed Gordon Pike's accounting firm, staring at the steering wheel. My conversation with Avery Nunez the day before was still ringing in my ears. A discordant bell that wouldn't stop tolling. You are not a stakeholder. Leah, Avery had said, her voice dropping to that professional, paralegal hush that made everything sound like a death sentence. You are a legal stranger to the company. You can't demand the books. You have to ask for them nicely. Ask nicely. That was the strategy. I was supposed to walk into the office of the man who had done my parents' taxes for 30 years, the man who gave me peppermint candies when I was 6, and pretend I was just a curious daughter looking to help. I was supposed to ignore the fact that my inheritance had been stolen and my family was hiding a financial cancer that threatened to kill the business I loved. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes. I looked like a woman who hadn't slept, because I hadn't. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, listening to the silence of the house and wondering which one of my family members was the architect of this disaster and which one was the victim. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my blazer, and opened the car door. Gordon Pike's office smelled exactly as it had 20 years ago. Stale coffee, old paper, and the faint, sweet scent of pipe tobacco, even though he had quit smoking in the 90s. Gordon was sitting behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by towers of manila folders. He looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was a thinning wisp of white, and his skin had the papery translucence of a man who spent too much time under fluorescent lights. "Leah!" he exclaimed when I walked in, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were darting around the room, looking anywhere but at me. "Marilyn told me you were back in town. Congratulations on the degree." "Thank you." "Gordon," I said, taking the seat opposite him without waiting to be asked. "It is good to see you." He shuffled some papers, his hands trembling slightly. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Your dad said you were just visiting for a few days." "Actually," I said, leaning forward and clasping my hands on the desk, "that is what I wanted to talk to you about. Dad is under a lot of pressure right now. I can see it. And with Kendra taking over," I let the sentence hang there, watching him. Gordon flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the jaw. But I caught it. "It is a big transition," he murmured. "Exactly," I said, "and I want to help. I have my MBA now." "Gordon, I know how to read a balance sheet better than I know how to read a novel. I was hoping you could walk me through the current financials, just so I can get up to speed and take some of the load off Dad and Kendra." I made my voice warm, helpful. The dutiful daughter. Gordon stopped shuffling. He placed his hands flat on the desk. "Leah," he said, his voice straining for authority, "I appreciate the offer, truly, but your father, he is very particular about how things are handled right now. I'm not asking for anything secret." I said, keeping my tone light, "Just the standard profit and loss statements, the accounts payable. I want to see where we can trim some fat." Gordon swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "I can give you a summary," he said. "A high-level overview." He opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed spreadsheet, but it was suspiciously sparse. The columns were broad, the categories vague. Operating expenses was a single. Massive number. Debt service was blank. I looked at the paper. This tells me nothing. "Gordon, it is the current snapshot," he said, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Where are the loan agreements?" I asked, dropping the act. "I know about Northbridge. Gordon," the color drained from his face. It happened so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. "I don't know what you are talking about." He whispered, "Don't lie to me." I said, my voice hardening, "I found the notice of default in the trash. I know Dad is in trouble. I know he transferred the business to Kendra to hide something. If you don't show me the real books, you are complicit in whatever is happening." Gordon stood up. He was shaking now. "I can't. Leah," he said, "Dale gave me strict instructions. No one sees the sensitive agreements. Not even you. Especially not you." "Why?" I demanded, standing up to meet him. "Why especially not me?" "Because you would try to fix it," he blurted out. The words hung in the dusty air between us. "What does that mean?" I asked. He slumped back into his chair, looking defeated. "Leah, please, leave it alone. Your father is trying to protect the legacy. If you go digging, you are going to bring the whole house of cards down. He is trying to protect the legacy by giving it to a predatory lender?" I asked. Gordon looked down at his hands. "I can't say any more. Please, Leah, go home." I stared at him for a long moment. This was a man who had come to my high school graduation, a man who had eaten at our table, and now he was stonewalling me. I took the useless summary sheet and crumpled it in my fist. "You are not protecting him." "Gordon," I said quietly, "you are burying him." I walked out of the office, the bell on the door chiming cheerfully behind me. I drove straight to the shop. My blood was boiling. I needed to see the physical reality of what was happening. I needed to see the inventory, the equipment, the things that were apparently being held hostage by a company called Northbridge. When I entered the hallway leading to the back offices, I stopped. The walls of the hallway had always been lined with framed photographs. The history of Patterson Marine, my grandfather standing on the keel of the first boat he built, my father in the 70s, looking young and wild with long hair and a wrench in his hand, and the family photos. There was one photo in particular. It was from the Harbor Pines Gazette, taken 10 years ago when the business won Small Business of the Year. It showed the four of us standing in front of the shop. Me, Kendra, Mom, and Dad. I was 22, fresh out of college the first time, smiling like I owned the world. I looked at the frame. The photo was there, but it was different. The matting had been changed. The frame was smaller, and I was gone. The photo had been cropped, physically cut. The left side, where I had been standing, was simply missing. It was now just Kendra, Mom, and Dad. The composition was off-center, awkward, but the message was surgical in its precision. I reached out and touched the glass. It wasn't just that I wasn't in the picture. It was that someone had taken the time to remove me, to take a pair of scissors and slice me out of the family history. "Hey," I turned. Kendra was standing at the end of the hallway. She was wearing a polo shirt with the new corporate logo on it. It looked too big for her. She was holding a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "What are you doing?" she asked. I pointed at the photo. "Who did this?" Kendra looked at the picture, then looked away. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. It was just... The old frame broke. She mumbled, "We had to resize it." "You resized it by cutting me out?" I asked, stepping closer to her. "You weren't here." "Leah!" she snapped, her defensive anger flaring up. "You are never here. Why should you be on the wall? This is for the people who actually work here." "I work here," I said, "or I'm supposed to." "You abandoned us," Kendra shouted. Her voice echoed in the narrow hallway. "You went to Chicago." You went to get your fancy degree so you could go work for some Fortune 500 company. You didn't care about the shop until you thought there was a title in it for you. That is not true, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I went to get the skills we needed to expand, to save this place. We didn't need saving until you left, she said. She stopped, realizing she had said too much. Her eyes went wide. What does that mean? I asked. What happened when I left? Nothing, she said, backing away. Kendra, I said, I talked to Gordon. He wouldn't show me the papers. But he acted like he was attending a funeral. I know about the loan. I took a guess, a gamble based on the scrap of paper and Avery's intuition. I know about the bridge loan. Kendra. I said it was a generic term, but it hit her like a physical blow. She dropped the clipboard. It clattered to the linoleum floor. He told you? She whispered. No. I said, you just did. Kendra looked terrified. She bent down to pick up the clipboard, her hands shaking. It was just to get us through the winter. She stammered. The slow season was bad. Dad said we just needed a bridge, just a temporary influx to cover payroll and the new inventory. And the collateral? I asked. What did he put up? The equipment. She said, just the big lifts. And the inventory. I felt cold. The lifts were worth $200,000 apiece. They were the heart of the operation. Without them, we couldn't haul boats. We were just a parking lot. Kendra, I said softly. Who signed the loan? She stood up, hugging the clipboard again. Dad did. But what? But when he transferred the business, the debt went with the assets. I closed my eyes. Of course, that was the play. Dad took the loan, realized he couldn't pay it, and transferred the company to Kendra. Maybe he thought it protected him personally. Maybe he thought Northbridge wouldn't foreclose on a new woman-owned business. Or maybe he just panicked and threw the hot potato to the person standing closest to him. Kendra, I said, do you understand what a default means? It means we pay a penalty, she said, sounding like a child repeating a lesson she didn't understand. Dad said we just pay a fee and restructure. No, I said, it means they take the lifts. It means they take the stock. It means they lock the doors. She shook her head violently. No, Dad said it was fine. He said Northbridge was a partner. Northbridge is a shark. I said, stop it, she screamed. Stop trying to scare me. You are just jealous because Dad picked me. You can't stand that I am the owner and you are nothing. She turned and ran into the office, my father's office, and slammed the door. I heard the lock click. I stood in the hallway, staring at the cropped photo. The silence returned, buzzing like a fluorescent light. I wasn't just fighting for the business anymore. I was fighting to stop my sister from being the captain of the Titanic 5 minutes after hitting the iceberg. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof. I left the shop and drove to the county clerk's office. If there was a lien, it had to be filed. The Uniform Commercial Code required it. The clerk was a young woman with bright purple fingernails who looked bored out of her mind. I filled out the request form, paid the search fee, $20, and waited. 10 minutes later, she handed me a printout. There it was, a UCC, one financing statement. Debtor, Patterson Marine Supply, secured party, Northbridge Capital Solutions. Collateral, all inventory, equipment, accounts receivable, and future proceeds. It wasn't just the lifts. It was everything, every nut, every bolt, every dollar that came through the door. And the date, the filing date was 6 months ago. My father hadn't just taken a bridge loan for the winter. He had mortgaged the entire company half a year ago. And the transfer to Kendra? That happened 3 weeks ago, just as the first payments would have been missed. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like the pavement was tilting under my feet. The betrayal was total. My father had sold our future and handed the bill to Kendra. When I got back to the house, it was late afternoon. The sky had turned a bruised purple, threatening rain. Marilyn was in the living room, sorting through a cedar chest. The smell of mothballs was overpowering. "Leah," she said, smiling as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't spent the day uncovering the family's ruin. "Come sit. I was just looking through some of your grandmother's things." She patted the sofa cushion next to her. I sat down. Wary. Look, she said, holding up a delicate lace tablecloth. Grandma knitted this. I was thinking you might want it, for your apartment in Chicago. It was a peace offering, or a bribe. It is beautiful. Mom, I said. And these, she said, handing me a stack of index cards. The secret recipes, the cherry pie, the glaze for the ham. You always loved these. I took the cards. They felt fragile in my hands. Thank you, I said. She watched me, her eyes scanning my face. She was looking for a crack, a way in. You know, she said softly, we are so proud of you. The MBA, it is a big achievement. I didn't answer. I knew a but was coming. But, she continued, it must be expensive, living in the city, the tuition. I have loans. I said, but I manage. Do you have any savings? She asked. The question was sharp, sudden. I looked at her. Excuse me? Savings, she repeated. Did you manage to put anything away while you were working? Why do you ask? Well, she said, smoothing the lace tablecloth over her knees. With the transition, things are a little tight at the shop. Just temporarily, until the new contracts come in. I was thinking, if you had a little nest egg, it might be a good investment. To help your sister get started, I felt like I had been slapped. She wanted my money. She wanted me to pour my life savings into the black hole they had created. Mom, I said, my voice trembling, are you asking me to invest in the business? We would pay you back, she said quickly, with interest. Better than the bank. Does Dad know you are asking me this? She looked away. Your father is proud. He wouldn't ask. But I am practical. We are family. Leah. Family helps family. Like you helped me by cutting me out of the founder's photo? I asked. She froze. You saw that? Yes, I saw it. It was Kendra's idea. She lied. I knew she was lying. Marilyn managed the hallway decor. Marilyn managed the image of the family. I don't have any money. Mom, I lied back. It went to tuition. I am broke. The disappointment in her eyes was naked. She didn't care about my struggle. She only cared that I was a dry well. I see, she said, her voice turning cold again. Well, that is a shame. She stood up and began folding the tablecloth. The tender moment over. I need a glass of water, I said. I went into the kitchen, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the glass. I leaned against the counter, trying to breathe. The kitchen was cluttered. My mother's system of organization was to pile things on every available surface, mail, coupons, keys. My eyes landed on a small, yellow slip of paper stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. It was an appointment reminder card. Harbor Pines Oncology Wellness Center. Patient, Dale Patterson. Date, January 29th. Time, 2 p.m. January 29th. That was in 2 days. Oncology. The word sucked the air out of the room. Cancer. I stared at the card. Suddenly, the pieces slammed together. The weight loss, the gray skin, the tiredness, the desperation. He wasn't just hiding a bad business deal. He was dying. Or he thought he was. I heard the back door open. My father walked in. He looked exhausted, his boots heavy on the linoleum. He saw me standing there. He saw where I was looking. He walked over and snatched the card off the fridge, shoving it into his pocket. Privacy. Leah, he muttered. It is a lost art in this house. Dad, I said. Oncology? It is nothing, he said, turning his back to me to wash his hands at the sink. Just a screening. Routine. Routine screenings happen at the GP. Dad, not at the cancer center. I had a scare, he said, scrubbing his hands violently. A shadow on an X-ray. They are just checking it out. It is nothing. Is that why? I asked. Is that why you gave the shop to Kendra? Because you are sick? I am not sick, he shouted. He spun around, water dripping from his hands. I am fine. I am handling it. You are not handling it, I shouted back. You mortgaged the company to Northbridge. You put everything we own up as collateral. And now you are defaulting. Who told you that? He demanded. His face went purple. Did Gordon talk? I will fire him. I will sue him. No one had to talk. Dad, it is public record. I went to the courthouse. I saw the lien. He leaned back against the sink, looking suddenly frail. The anger evaporated, leaving only a terrified old man. I had to, he whispered. The fire. What fire? I asked. Last fall, he said, in the storage shed. We lost $50,000 in stock. The insurance. They fought me on it. Said the wiring was old. They wouldn't pay. I needed cash to restock for the spring. Northbridge was the only one who said yes fast enough. So you signed a deal with the devil? I thought I could turn it around. He said, I thought if we had a good season. But you didn't. I said, and now they own us. Not yet. He said, not yet. Dad, why Kendra? Why did you put her name on it? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the truth in his eyes. It wasn't malice, it was protection. Because if I go bankrupt, he said, his voice cracking, they take the house, they take your mother's pension. But if the business is in Kendra's name, and she defaults, then Kendra goes bankrupt. I finished for him, and you keep the house. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. You are using her as a shield. I said, horrified. You are sacrificing your own daughter to save your retirement. She doesn't have anything to lose, he argued. Desperate now. She is young. She has no assets. Bankruptcy won't hurt her like it would hurt us. She can start over. She is your daughter, I screamed. She thinks you honored her. She thinks you chose her because you believed in her. I did what I had to do, he yelled, to protect this family. And me? I asked. Why did you cut me out? Because you have a future, he said. You have a career. I couldn't drag you into this mess. If I put your name on it, they would come after your wages. They would ruin your credit before you even started. I stared at him. It was a twisted, broken kind of love. He had spared me because he respected my potential, and he had doomed Kendra because he didn't. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I couldn't look at him. I went to my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going until I pulled into the parking lot of Avery's apartment complex. I banged on her door. She opened it, wearing pajamas and holding a cat. Leah? I pushed past her into the living room and paced the floor. My energy frantic. You were right. I said, you were right about everything. The accountant? She asked, closing the door. Worse. I said, the lien is real. Northbridge has everything, and my dad is sick. Maybe cancer. He borrowed the money to cover a loss from a fire, and now he is drowning. And the transfer? Avery asked. He made Kendra the owner, so when the business crashes, it crashes on her. I said, he is saving the house, he is saving Mom, and he is letting Kendra take the bullet. Avery sat down on the sofa, clutching the cat. That is evil. Leah. It is practical, I said, spitting the word out. That is what he called it. Practical. So what are you going to do? She asked. I stopped pacing. I looked at my friend. He thinks he is smart. I said, he thinks he has outmaneuvered the bank, but he doesn't know who he is dealing with. Northbridge isn't a bank. They are predators. They don't want the money back. They want the business. And if they get the business, Avery said, then my father's sacrifice is for nothing. I said, they will take the business from Kendra, and then they will find a way to come after him anyway. Personal guarantees, fraudulent conveyance. They will tear him apart. I took a deep breath. I have to stop it. How? Avery asked. You have no legal standing. Not yet, I said, but I have something they don't. What? I have nothing to lose. I said, and I am really, really angry. I looked at the clock on Avery's wall. It was 9 p.m. Avery, I said, I need you to find out everything you can about Northbridge. Not just the filings. I want to know who runs it. I want to know who their lawyers are. I want to know who else they have buried. I can do that, she said, a spark of excitement in her eyes. But why? Because, I said, if my father won't let me save the business as a daughter, I am going to have to save it as a stranger. I am going to audit them. I am going to find the crack in the armor. I am going to war. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, a stagnant pool of black water that mirrored the mood in the kitchen. The morning light filtering through the gingham curtains was gray and diffuse, the kind of light that made everything look tired. My father sat at the head of the table, staring at a plate of untouched scrambled eggs. My mother was at the sink, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. Kendra was gone, having fled the house before sunrise to open the shop. Or perhaps just to escape the suffocating air of unspoken truths. I had spent the night strategizing. The anger that had fueled my drive to Avery's apartment had cooled into a hard, dense resolve. Screaming about fairness would get me nowhere. Screaming about the law would only make my father dig his heels in deeper. If I wanted to save them, and I still, stupidly, desperately wanted to save them, I had to stop being the daughter who demanded answers and start being the consultant who offered solutions. "Dad," I said, breaking the silence. He didn't look up. He just moved a piece of egg with his fork. "What is it, Leah?" "I want to help," I said. I kept my voice low, steady, stripped of all judgment. "I know things are tight. I know about the cash flow issues. You don't have to tell me the details if you don't want to, but you have to let me help you fix the structure." He sighed, a heavy rattling sound in his chest. "You can't fix it. Lee, it is handled. It isn't handled." "Dad," I said, "it is buried. There is a difference." Marilyn stopped scrubbing. The water ran for a second, then she shut it off. "I have a friend in Chicago," I continued, pressing my advantage. "He works for a mid-sized audit firm. They specialize in family business restructuring. They aren't sharks. They are fixers. I can get them to come up here, do a quiet review of the books, and help us negotiate with the creditors." I saw his hand tighten around the fork until his knuckles turned white. "No," he said. "Dad, they can help refinance the debt. If we show the bank a solid restructuring plan." I said no. He slammed the fork down. It clattered against the ceramic plate. A gunshot in the quiet room. He looked up at me then, and I expected to see the stubborn pride of the patriarch. I expected the anger of a man who hated being questioned. But that wasn't what I saw. I saw terror. Absolute, unadulterated fear. "No outsiders," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No one from Chicago. No one from the banks. No audits." "Why?" I asked, gentle. "Why are you so afraid of someone looking at the books?" "Because it is my business," he shouted. Standing up, his chair scraped violently against the linoleum. "It is my name on the door. I don't need some city suit coming in here and telling me I failed. It is not about failure, Dad. It is about survival." "You don't understand," he yelled. "You think it is just numbers. You think it is just math. It is not math. It is people. It is promises I made." He was breathing hard, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. He pressed a hand to his chest, rubbing the sternum as if he could massage the panic away. "Dale," Marilyn said sharply, moving to his side. "Sit down. You are working yourself up." He pulled away from her. "I am going to work." He grabbed his keys and stormed out the back door. The screen door slammed shut, vibrating in the frame. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the door, her face a mask of worry that she quickly smoothed over when she felt my eyes on her. "He is just stressed," she said. "He is hiding something." "Mom," I said, "something bigger than a loan. If he lets an auditor in, they will find it. That is why he is scared. Leave it alone." "Leah," she said, her voice turning cold, "you come here with your solutions, thinking you can just wave a magic wand. You don't know the weight he carries. Then tell me," I pleaded. She shook her head. "Finish your breakfast." I didn't finish my breakfast. I left the house 10 minutes later, but I didn't go to the shop to see my father. I went to see Mara Wilkins. Mara was the office manager at Patterson Marine. She was a woman of indeterminate age, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob and a pair of reading glasses that hung permanently on a chain around her neck. She had been the gatekeeper of the company's invoices for 15 years, if anyone knew where the bodies were buried. It was Mara. I found her in the break room, staring into a cup of vending machine coffee. She looked tired. Her usually crisp blouse was wrinkled, and there was a heaviness to her posture that I had never seen before. "Hey, Mara," I said. She jumped, spilling a little coffee on the table. "Oh, Leah, you startled me." "Sorry," I said. I grabbed a paper towel and wiped up the spill. "Do you have a minute?" She looked at the door, checking to see if anyone was watching. "Technically, I should be at my desk. Your sister. Kendra is trying to implement a new filing system." I snorted. Kendra thinks filing is putting everything in a box and taping it shut. Mara offered a weak, fleeting smile. "It is chaotic." I sat down across from her. "Mara, I need you to be honest with me. I know Dad is in trouble. I know about Northbridge." Mara's eyes widened behind her glasses. "You know? I know enough, but I need to know how bad it is on the ground. Dad won't let me see the books." Mara looked down at her coffee. She traced the rim of the styrofoam cup with a nervous finger. "It is bad. Leah," she whispered. "We are on credit hold with 3 of our major parts suppliers. Yamaha won't ship to us anymore unless we pay cash on delivery." "Cash on delivery?" I repeated. "For engines? That is thousands of dollars up front. We don't have the cash," she said. "So we are buying aftermarket parts from third-party vendors, cheaper stuff. But we are charging the customers for the premium parts." My stomach turned. That was fraud. If a customer found out we put a generic pump in their boat and charged them for the brand name, the lawsuit would end us. "Does Dad know?" "He ordered it," Mara said. She looked like she was about to cry. "He said we had to keep the margins up. He said it was just until the liquidity issue was resolved. And the customers? We are pushing them for cash deals," she said, "offering a 10% discount if they pay in bills. No checks. Off the books." I realized he was skimming cash to pay the loan shark, bypassing the business accounts so the bank wouldn't see the drain. "Mara," I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand, "how long has this been going on?" 6 months, she said. "Since the fire." The fire. Everyone kept coming back to the fire. "Dale isn't himself." "Leah," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He forgets things. Last week, he yelled at a customer for an invoice that had already been paid. Then 5 minutes later, he was joking with him like nothing happened. I think he's losing track of the lies." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you." "Mara." I stood up to leave, my mind racing. The fraud was active, the desperation was palpable, but I still needed the paper trail. As I walked out of the break room, I passed Kendra's desk, my father's old desk. It was empty. Kendra was likely out on the floor. Pretending to supervise the mechanics, I glanced at the desk. It was a mess of papers, sticky notes, and half-open mail. My father was meticulous. Kendra was a tornado. My eyes caught a flash of yellow. It was a carbon copy of a receipt, sticking out from under a pile of catalogs. I recognized the logo at the top. Harbor Pines Self-Store. I frowned. We had a massive warehouse. Why would we need a self-storage unit? I glanced around. The coast was clear. I reached out and pulled the receipt free. It was dated 3 days ago. Unit 4B. Renter. Kendra Patterson. I took a picture of it with my phone and slipped it back under the catalog. Harbor Pines. Self-store was a row of orange metal doors out on the highway, past the edge of town where the strip malls gave way to scrubland. It was the kind of place people stored their divorces and their hoarding problems. I drove there immediately. I didn't have a key, but I knew the owner. Old Mr. Henderson. He had bought his boat from us for 20 years. I walked into the rental office. Mr. Henderson was watching a game show on a small television. "Hi, Mr. Henderson," I said, flashing my best smile. "Leah," he said, muting the TV. "I heard you were back. How is the big city?" Loud. I said, "Listen, I am running an errand for Kendra. She sent me to grab some files from the unit, but she forgot to give me the key. You wouldn't happen to have a master, would you? He hesitated. Technically, only the renter is supposed to have access. I know. I said, but Dad is screaming for these tax documents. And you know how he gets. If I have to drive all the way back to the marina to get Kendra's key, he is going to blow a gasket. Mr. Henderson chuckled. Dale and his temper. All right, just this once. He grabbed a ring of keys and walked me down the gravel drive to Unit 4B. He unlocked the orange door and rolled it up. Thanks, Mr. Henderson, I said. I will just be a minute. He nodded and wandered back to his TV. I stepped inside. The unit was small, 10 by 10. It smelled of dust and damp cardboard. There were about 20 bankers' boxes stacked against the wall. They weren't old family photos or Christmas decorations. They were labeled in Kendra's loopy handwriting. Invoices 2024. Vendor contracts. Payroll. Why were current business records in a storage unit? I opened the top box. It was full of manila folders. I started flipping through them. Most of it was mundane, but at the bottom of the second box, I found a thick binder. It wasn't labeled with a Sharpie. It had a printed cover sheet. Project Anchor. Draft Acquisition Agreement. Prepared for Saltmere Holdings. Saltmere Holdings. I opened the binder. It was a contract, a purchase agreement. I scanned the pages, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a draft for the sale of Patterson Marine Supply to Saltmere Holdings. The price was low, shockingly low. Basically the value of the real estate and the assumption of debt. But it was the date that froze me. The draft was dated 2 months ago. My father had been negotiating to sell the company for months, but he hadn't told anyone. I flipped to the back. There was an addendum labeled Acquisition Options. Option A. Full asset purchase upon default. Option B. Equity conversion via Northbridge facility. I stared at the words, via Northbridge facility. Saltmere wasn't just a buyer. They were connected to the lender. Northbridge was the funnel. They lent the money on impossible terms to force the default, so Saltmere could swoop in and buy the assets for pennies on the dollar. It was a setup, a coordinated squeeze play. Suddenly, the daylight streaming into the unit was blocked. I spun around. Kendra was standing in the doorway. She was wearing her work polo and jeans. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. She held a set of keys in her hand. "Leah?" she whispered. I stood up, holding the binder against my chest like a shield. "What is this? Kendra?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What is Saltmere Holdings?" She didn't yell. She didn't accuse me of spying. She just crumbled. Her shoulders slumped, and she dropped the keys into the dirt. She covered her face with her hands and started to sob. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was a jagged, gasping sound of pure exhaustion. "I didn't want to," she wailed. "I told him I didn't want to." I stepped over the boxes and walked to her. I didn't hug her. I just stood there. "What didn't you want to do?" I asked. "Sign it," she choked out. "I told him I didn't understand it. I told him to call you." "And what did he say?" "He said I had to," she said, looking up at me with wet, red eyes. "He said if I didn't sign, we would lose everything. He said he needed a clean slate. He said Saltmere would save us. Saltmere isn't saving us." "Kendra," I said harshly. "They are eating us. Did you read this?" "I tried," she cried, "but it is all legalese. Dad said he explained it. He said Saltmere would buy the company, keep him on as a manager, and pay off the debt. He said it was the only way out. And why put the business in your name first? Because Saltmere wouldn't buy it from him," she said. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Dad said he had history with one of the investors. Bad blood. He said if they saw his name on the deed, they would walk away. So he transferred it to me. He said I was just holding it, just for a few months until the sale went through." I looked at my little sister. She looked so small in that doorway. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't a mastermind. She was a patsy. My father had lied to her. He had told her she was the hero, the savior of the family, while he handed her a grenade with the pin pulled out. "He lied to you." I said softly. No, she whispered. Dad wouldn't. He did. Kendra, Saltmere and Northbridge are the same people. They lent us money we couldn't pay back, so they could force us to sell to them for nothing. And by putting it in your name, Dad made sure that when the lawsuit comes, it has your name on it, not his. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The horror was slowly dawning on her. He said I was protecting the family, she whispered. You are, I said. You are the human shield. She collapsed onto one of the boxes, burying her face in her hands again. I felt a surge of rage so pure it almost blinded me. It wasn't at Kendra anymore. The jealousy, the resentment, it all evaporated. She was just a victim in this. The real betrayal was upstairs. In the master bedroom of the house where I grew up, I closed the binder. Come on, I said. Where? She asked. Home, I said. I have a question for Mom. I drove us back to the house. Kendra sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, looking like a ghost. When we walked in, Marilyn was in the living room, reading a magazine. She looked up, saw Kendra's tear-streaked face and the binder in my hand, and her expression hardened instantly. She didn't ask what was wrong. She went on the defensive. What have you done to your sister? She demanded. Standing up, I didn't do anything. I said, I found the storage unit. Mom, I found the Saltmere papers. Marilyn's face went white. She looked at Kendra, then back at me. You had no right, she hissed. I had every right, I shouted. You are letting Dad feed Kendra to the wolves. Do you know what this is? This is a liquidation plan. It is a merger, Marilyn shouted back. It is a way to retire. It is a theft, I said. And you knew? You knew he was setting Kendra up? Marilyn stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a bitterness I had never seen before. Of course I knew, she screamed. Someone had to know. Someone had to help him carry it. Why not me? I asked. Why didn't you call me? I could have read this contract. I could have told you it was a trap, because you would have judged him. She spat the words at me. I recoiled. What? You think you are so perfect, she said, her voice shaking with venom. With your degree and your city job? You come back here and you look at this house, at this town, like it is beneath you. You look at your father like he is a quaint little failure. I have never— You do, she interrupted. You judge us. You judge Kendra for staying. You judge Dale for struggling. If we told you, you wouldn't have just helped. You would have lectured. You would have taken over. And your father? He couldn't take that. He couldn't take his successful daughter looking at him with pity. Is that what this is about? I whispered. His ego? You destroyed the business to protect his ego? We did it to protect our dignity, she said, and I won't be pitied by you. Leah, I won't let you look at me like I am some stupid old woman who doesn't understand the world. She was shaking. I realized then that the resentment went both ways. I had felt abandoned by them, but they had felt judged by me. My success had become a mirror reflecting their decline, and they hated me for it. So you used Kendra, I said quietly. Because she wouldn't judge you, because she would just do what she was told. Marilyn didn't answer. She turned her head away. I noticed a pamphlet on the side table next to her chair. Faith and Family. Mediation Services. I picked it up. Inside, there was a handwritten note. Appointment. Tuesday, 4 p.m. Reverend Thomas Keene. You are seeing Reverend Keene? I asked. Yes, she said stiffly. For counseling. Family counseling? Yes. Why wasn't I invited? I asked. If it is family counseling, because we needed to manage the transition, she said. Reverend Keene helped Dale accept the changes. He helped us explain it to Kendra. You used a pastor to manipulate them? I asked. Horrified. We used him to keep this family together, she cried. Something you clearly don't care about. I threw the pamphlet on the floor. I care enough to stop you from destroying yourselves. I said. I grabbed Kendra's arm. Come on. We are going to the shop. We are going to find Dad. We drove to the marina in silence. The sky had darkened, heavy clouds rolling in off the lake. The water was a churning gray. When we walked into the shop, the tension was physical. The mechanics were working in silence, heads down. We found Dad in the back, by the parts counter. He was arguing with a delivery driver. "I told you, the check is in the mail," Dale was shouting. "I can't leave the pallet." "Mr. Patterson," the driver said, looking bored. "My orders are cash or carry." "Dad?" I called out. He spun around. He looked terrible. His face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill in the shop. "Leah," he rasped. "Not now. We need to talk about Saltmere." I said. The color drained from his face completely. He swayed. I saw it happen in slow motion. His eyes rolled back slightly, and his knees buckled. He reached out, grabbing the counter for support. A stack of catalogs slid off and crashed to the floor. "Dad!" Kendra screamed. We ran to him. I caught him by the arm just as he sagged toward the ground. He was heavy, a dead weight of exhaustion and fear. "I am fine," he mumbled, his speech slurring slightly. "Just dizzy. Sit down," I commanded. I dragged a stool over and forced him onto it. "Get him water!" I yelled at the delivery driver, who was staring with wide eyes. The driver ran to the cooler. Dale sat there, clutching his chest, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. I looked into his eyes. I saw the pupil response was sluggish. I saw the terror. It wasn't just the stress. It was the illness, the secret he was keeping from the oncology center. "Dad," I said, gripping his shoulders. "Look at me. Is it the cancer?" He shook his head weakly. "Stress. Just stress." I looked down at the counter where he had been standing. Amidst the invoices and the argument, there was an open envelope. It was on Northbridge letterhead. I picked it up. My father tried to snatch it, but his hand was too weak. I read the bold text in the center of the page. "Notice of acceleration, pursuant to the default under the loan agreement. Northbridge Capital Solutions hereby exercises its right to accelerate the entire outstanding balance of $450,000. Payment in full is due within 14 days. Failure to remit will result in immediate seizure of all collateral listed in Schedule A and the enforcement of the personal guarantee signed by Dale Patterson." I froze. The personal guarantee. He hadn't escaped it. The transfer to Kendra hadn't worked. He had signed a personal guarantee. If the business failed, they would take the shop, the equipment, and then they would come for him. They would take the house. They would take everything. The transfer to Kendra was meaningless. It was a placebo, a legal fiction he told himself so he could sleep at night. "Dad," I whispered, holding the letter up, "you signed a personal guarantee." He looked at the floor, tears leaking from his eyes. "I didn't read the fine print," he whispered. "They said it was standard. They said the transfer would nullify it." "Who said that?" "The broker. He said, 'The man from Saltmere.'" I looked at the date on the letter. 14 days. But the letter was dated 10 days ago. We have 4 days. I said, 4 days until they take the business. 4 days until they liquidate us. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The gift to Kendra wasn't just a trap. It was a bomb, and the timer was already down to single digits. I looked at my father, broken and gray on the stool. I looked at Kendra, weeping silently by the door. I looked at the delivery driver, who was awkwardly holding a cup of water. This wasn't a business problem anymore. It was a hostage situation. I took the cup of water from the driver and handed it to my father. "Drink," I said. He drank, his hands shaking. Then I turned to Kendra. "Get the files," I said. "Which ones?" she asked. "All of them," I said. "The Saltmere binder, the Northbridge loan docs, the emails, everything you have in that storage unit. Bring it all to the dining room table tonight." "What are you going to do?" Marilyn asked, appearing in the doorway. She must have followed us. She looked at Dale, then at me, fear warring with her pride. "I am going to read every single word," I said, "and then I am going to find the clause that kills them. But we have 4 days. "Leah," Dale whispered, "then we don't have time to sleep. Do we?" I said. I looked at the Northbridge letter again. Notice of acceleration. They wanted a fight? They wanted to bully a sick old man and a naive young woman? They had made one critical mistake. They forgot to check if there was another Patterson. The drive back to Chicago was a blur of gray highway and static radio. I had fled Harbor Pines not because I was giving up, but because I needed air. I needed to stand on firm ground, in a world where contracts meant what they said, and families didn't cannibalize themselves out of misplaced pride. My apartment in the city was exactly as I had left it. Cool, silent, and aggressively beige. I stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by the trappings of the life I had built: the ergonomic chair, the Nespresso machine, the view of the skyline that cost me half my paycheck. It felt like a stage set. I tried to open my laptop and answer the urgent emails from my logistics firm, but the words swam on the screen. Every time I blinked, I saw my father slumping against the counter at the marina. I heard the wet, jagged sound of Kendra's sobbing in the storage unit. I heard my mother's voice, sharp as a paring knife, telling me I had no right to pity them. I wasn't an employee of a Chicago logistics firm anymore. I was a Patterson, and the Pattersons were bleeding out. I couldn't fix this with anger. I needed expertise. I called Sonia Merritt. Sonia was a shark, but she was a shark who swam in the open ocean, not the murky backwaters of predatory lending. We had met in business school, where she had intimidated half the class by correcting the professor on tort law. Now she ran a boutique firm specializing in distressed assets. I met her at a coffee shop in the Loop. It was loud, filled with the clatter of porcelain and the hum of ambitious conversations. Sonia listened to me without interrupting, her eyes scanning the photos I had taken of the documents in the storage unit. "Leah," she said, pushing the phone back to me. "This isn't a loan. It is a foreclosure waiting to happen." "I know," I said. "But is it legal?" "It is borderline," she said, taking a sip of her espresso. "The terms are usurious, but they are buried in fees and consulting costs to skirt state caps. The acceleration clause is standard, but the timeline is aggressive. They gave your father money they knew he couldn't pay back, secured by assets they knew were worth triple the loan amount. So it is a trap." I said. "It is a squeeze," Sonia corrected. "They don't want the money. They want the marina. They want the real estate. Look at the connection to Saltmere. This isn't a bank lending money. This is a developer buying land without paying market price. They use the debt to force a distress sale. Can we stop it?" Sonia leaned back. "Maybe. If you can prove they coordinated the default, if you can prove they acted in bad faith or defrauded your father during the signing. But Leah, litigation takes months. You have 4 days before they seize the equipment." I felt a cold stone form in my stomach. "So we lose." "Not necessarily," she said. "You pay them off." "With what?" I asked. "We don't have $450,000. "You refinance," she said. "But no bank will touch the business with that lien on it. You need a bridge, a real one." She looked at me, her gaze assessing. "How is your credit?" she asked. "It is perfect," I said. "And your retirement? Your savings?" "I have some," I said. "Not enough to pay it off, but enough for a down payment." Sonia nodded. "Go back there. Go to a local bank, one that knows the property. Offer to personally guarantee a new loan. Use your credit, your degree, your salary history as the leverage your father doesn't have. Pay Northbridge off. Get the lien released. Then fight them on the fees later." "But my dad," I started. "Your dad is compromised," Sonia said ruthlessly. "He can't sign anything. He is panicked. You need to take the pen out of his hand." I drove back to Harbor Pines that afternoon. The city skyline retreated in the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was nothing but a memory. I was trading the safety of my future for the wreckage of my past, and I didn't even know if they would let me in the door. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. It was only 7 in the evening, but the curtains were drawn. It looked like a house in mourning. I let myself in. The air inside was stale. "Dad?" I called out. He was in the den, sitting in the dark, the television casting a flickering blue light over his face. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The powerful, stubborn man who had built boats with his bare hands was gone, replaced by a ghost. "Leah," he said, his voice rough. "I thought you went back to work." "I did," I said, and then I came back. I walked over and turned off the TV. The room plunged into shadow. I turned on the table lamp. He squinted, shielding his eyes. "We need to talk. Dad, real talk. No more protecting me. I am tired." "Lee," he whispered. "I know," I said, sitting on the ottoman in front of him. I took his hands. They were cold. "I know you are tired. I know you are sick. And I know you are scared. But I have a plan." He looked at me, a flicker of hope warring with shame in his eyes. "What plan?" "I can refinance the loan." I said, "I talked to a lawyer. I have excellent credit. I have a steady income. If I go to Harbor Pines Community Bank, if I put my name next to yours, or next to Kendra's, we might be able to get a legitimate loan to pay off Northbridge. We can stop the seizure." He shook his head slowly. "It is too much money. It is not too much if we have the assets." I said, "But I need to know everything. I need to know why we needed the money in the first place." He looked away, staring at the bookshelf where his bowling trophies gathered dust. "Dad," I said, squeezing his hands, "you said it was a fire. In the shed." "Yes," he murmured. "Why didn't insurance cover it? We have a comprehensive policy. I remember you paying the premiums." He pulled his hands away and rubbed his face. "They denied the claim." "Why?" "Negligence," he said, his voice barely audible. "They said the wiring was faulty. They said I installed a heater that wasn't code." "Did you?" He looked at me, his eyes wet. "I didn't think so. It was a new unit. I bought it from a supplier. It was supposed to be industrial grade, but the inspector said it shorted out. He said it was cheap junk." I paused. "A heater? Where did you buy it?" I asked. "A new vendor," he said. "They came by the shop last summer, giving out deals on shop equipment. Apex Industrial Supply." "Apex," I repeated. I pulled out my phone. I still had the photos of the documents from the storage unit. I scrolled through them until I found the vendor list I had seen in Kendra's boxes. There it was, Apex Industrial Supply. And right next to it, in the vendor address column, was a P.O. box in Delaware. The same P.O. box as Saltmere Holdings. My blood ran cold. "Dad," I said, "did Northbridge recommend Apex?" He frowned, thinking, I don't know. Maybe. The rep who sold me the heater mentioned that if I ever needed capital, there were options. He might have mentioned Northbridge." "Why?" "Because," I said, my voice rising with the realization, "they sold you the faulty heater that caused the fire. Then, when the insurance denied the claim, which they probably knew would happen because the equipment was non-compliant, they offered you the loan to fix the damage." He stared at me. "No, that is conspiracy. Leah, it is a vertically integrated scam." I said, "They burn you down, then they sell you the water to put it out. And the price of the water is the deed to your house." I stood up and paced the small room. It made sense. It made sickening, perfect sense. The fire wasn't an accident. It was the entry point. "We need to find the emails." I said, "Dad, did you email with Northbridge? Or the Apex rep?" "Kendra did." He said, "She handles the email. Where is Kendra?" "She's in her room." I ran up the stairs and banged on Kendra's door. She opened it, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. "I need your laptop," I said. She didn't argue. She handed it to me. I sat on her bed and opened her email client. I searched for Northbridge. Dozens of emails popped up. I started reading. They were aggressive. "Mr. Patterson, we need the signature by close of business or the rate lock expires. Miss Patterson, please advise your father that legal review will delay funding by 3 weeks. Given your urgent liquidity needs, we recommend using our standard template. Urgent liquidity needs." They knew exactly how desperate he was. Then I searched for Apex. There was an email chain from 6 months ago. The rep, a man named Carter, was friendly, almost overly so. "Dale, great to meet you. This heater is top of the line. We can expedite shipping if you sign the waiver on installation." The waiver. I opened the attachment. It was a liability waiver that specifically released the manufacturer from damages caused by improper electrical load. They had set him up. They sold him a bomb and made him sign a paper saying it was his fault if it exploded. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jumped. It was Marilyn. She was standing in the doorway, holding a basket of laundry. She looked at the laptop screen, then at me. "You are digging again," she said. "I am finding the truth." "Mom," I said, turning to face her. "They set him up. The fire, the loan, the default. It was all planned." Marilyn put the basket down. She walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked defeated. "It doesn't matter." "Leah," she said softly, "how can you say that? Of course it matters. If we can prove fraud, it doesn't matter because he wanted to give it to them." She interrupted. I stopped. "What?" "He wanted out," she said. "Even before the fire. He was tired. Leah, he has been tired for years. The business, it hasn't been the same. The margins are thin. The work is hard. He is 65 years old." "So why didn't he just sell it?" I asked. "Why go through this charade?" "Because he couldn't sell it to a stranger," she said. "And he couldn't give it to you." "Why?" I demanded. "Why couldn't he give it to me?" "I wanted it. I have wanted it since I was 12. Because I wouldn't let him," she said. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the laptop fan. I stared at my mother. Her face was composed, but her hands were twisting the fabric of her skirt. "You wouldn't let him?" I whispered. "Years ago," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "When you were finishing college, Dale wanted to bring you in. He wanted to make you a partner. He was so proud. He had the papers drawn up. And I told him no." She said, "I told him that if he brought you back here, you would hate him for it eventually." "Mom, that is insanity, is it?" she asked, looking me in the eye. "Leah, you were always the bright one, the restless one. You needed the city. You needed big challenges. If you had come back here at 22, you would have suffocated. You would have resented the grease under your fingernails. You would have resented us." "So you decided for me?" I asked, my voice shaking with hurt. "You decided I would abandon you. So you pushed me away first? I told Dale that if he forced you to stay, you would leave anyway, and it would break his heart," she said. "I told him to let you go, to let you fly. I told him Kendra was the one who would stay." Kendra, who was sitting in the corner chair, made a small, wounded noise. "So I was the consolation prize?" Kendra whispered. "No, honey," Marilyn said, turning to her. "You were the faithful one. You were the one we could count on. To fail?" I snapped. "You counted on her to fail so Dad could have a dignified exit?" Marilyn flinched. "We didn't want her to fail. We hoped the business would sustain you both. But when the fire happened, Dale panicked. He felt like he had lost his legacy. And then these men came along, promising to save it, promising to buy him out and keep the name." She looked down at her hands. "He just wanted to rest. Leah, he just wanted to stop fighting." I looked at the two of them, my mother, who had manipulated the family structure out of fear of abandonment, my sister, who had been burdened with a legacy she couldn't carry because she was the safe choice, and my father, downstairs in the dark, dying of pride and cancer. It was a tragedy of good intentions. But Northbridge wasn't well-intentioned. They were wolves feeding on this weakness. "I am going to fix this," I said, standing up. "How?" Kendra asked. "I am going to get Dad to agree to the refinance, and then I am going to expose Saltmere. But I need to know one thing." "Kendra." "What? Why were you so willing to sign the sale agreement? You were crying in the storage unit, but you had the pen in your hand. Why?" Kendra looked at the floor. "They offered me a job," she whispered. "A job?" "A consulting role," she said. "Saltmere. They said if the acquisition went through smoothly, without any family drama, they would hire me as a regional consultant, $70,000 a year, remote work, and I could leave," she said. her voice breaking. I could move to Florida. I could finally get out of Harbor Pines. I could stop being the disappointment. I looked at her, stunned. She didn't want the business any more than Mom thought I did. She was trapped in it. Saltmere had offered her an escape hatch, and she had grabbed it. They bribed you, I said. They offered me a future, she countered. Just like you have. I took a deep breath. Okay. So everyone has a secret. Mom blocked me. Dad hid the fire. Kendra took a bribe. And I was too busy climbing the ladder to notice the house was burning down. I closed the laptop. We are having a meeting, I said. Downstairs. Now. All of us. We marched downstairs. I turned on the lights in the dining room. I made Dale come in from the den. I made everyone sit at the table. This stops tonight, I said. The secrets stop. The lying stops. Dale looked at me, his eyes weary. Leah, what is the point? The point is that we are being hunted. I said, I told them about Apex. I told them about the connection to Saltmere. I laid out the timeline, the fire, the loan, the default, the purchase offer. This isn't bad luck. Dad, I said, this is a hit. They targeted us. Dale listened, his face growing paler with every word. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear. Lee, I didn't know about the heater. I know, I said, but now we do, and that gives us leverage. But we can't use it if we are divided. We have to be a single unit. We have to refinance the debt and kick them out. I put my hand on the table. I am willing to put up my savings. I said, I am willing to co-sign the loan, but only if you sign the operating agreement over to me. Not as a gift. As a partner. I run the business. I deal with the bank. Kendra can go to Florida if she wants. Mom can retire, but I take the wheel. Dale looked at me. He looked at Marilyn. Marilyn gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He took a breath. He opened his mouth to speak. Then his phone buzzed. It was sitting on the table between us. The screen lit up. A single text message. Dale looked at it. His eyes went wide. The color that had started to return to his face vanished instantly. What? I asked. He reached out a shaking hand and turned the phone over. Face down. I can't, he whispered. Can't what? I can't do it. Leah, the meeting is over. He stood up, his legs trembling. Dad, sit down, I ordered. No, he shouted. He looked terrified, more terrified than he had been about the cancer. More terrified than he had been about the bankruptcy. Forget it. Leah, just let them have it. Let them take it. He turned to run back to the den. I lunged across the table and grabbed the phone. Leah, don't, he screamed. I flipped it over. The message was from an unknown number. No name, just digits. I read the text. You talk, you lose the shop. And we tell the EPA about the spill in '98. I froze. The EPA. The spill. I looked up at my father. He was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. What spill? I asked. He sank against the doorframe. It was an accident. He sobbed. An oil tank leaked. Into the groundwater. It was nearly 30 years ago. I cleaned it up. I dug out the dirt myself. But I didn't report it. I couldn't afford the fine. And who knows about it? I asked. No one. He said. Just me. And who? And the man who helped me dig it out. He whispered. Who? A guy I hired for the summer. A kid. What was his name? Calvin. He said. Calvin Rourke. I felt the name hit me like a physical blow. Calvin Rourke. I had seen that name on the Northbridge website. He was the signatory on the acceleration notice. He was the senior vice president of asset recovery. The man who was destroying my father wasn't a stranger. He was a ghost from the past. A man who held a 30-year-old secret that could turn a bankruptcy into a prison sentence. This wasn't just a squeeze play. This was blackmail. Dad, I said, my voice cold and hard. They aren't just watching us. They are inside our history. I looked at the phone again. You talk. You lose the shop. They knew we were having a meeting. They knew we were talking right now. I looked at the window. The curtains were drawn, but I felt the weight of eyes on the house. Leah, Give me the phone, Dale pleaded. We have to stop. We have to do what they say. I gripped the phone tight. No, I said, we are done doing what they say. I looked at my family. They were broken, terrified, and compromised. But they were mine. If Calvin Rourke wanted a fight, I would give him one. But I wouldn't fight him with contracts anymore. I would fight him with the one thing he didn't think we had left. The truth. I am going to the police. I said, no, Dale shouted. The EPA. The fines. It will destroy us. They are already destroying us, I yelled back. The only way out is through the fire. Dad. I walked to the window and ripped the curtains open. I stood there, silhouetted in the light, staring out into the dark driveway. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know I wasn't afraid. If you are out there, I shouted at the darkness, come and get it. Nothing moved, just the wind in the pines and the distant sound of the lake crashing against the shore. But I knew they were there, and I knew the war had just begun. The morning after the text message threatened to bury us, I did not go to the police. I went to Avery's apartment. We turned her living room into a war room. The coffee table was buried under stacks of paper, invoices from Apex Industrial Supply, loan documents from Northbridge, and the draft acquisition agreement from Saltmere. Avery sat on the floor with her laptop, her hair pulled back in a chaotic bun, typing furiously. This is a spider web, Avery said, pointing at the screen. I pulled the corporate filings for Apex. Their registered agent is the same as Saltmere's, a law firm in Wilmington. And guess who sits on the board of the holding company that owns Northbridge? Calvin Rourke? I guessed. No, Avery said, but Calvin Rourke was a junior analyst at the firm that underwrote the initial capitalization for Saltmere. He is the connective tissue. He worked for the money, and now he works for the muscle. So it is a RICO case, I said. Racketeering. It smells like it, Avery said, but proving it requires subpoena power we don't have. We need a judge to grant an injunction to stop the seizure of the assets. And to get that, we need to prove that the loan itself was fraudulent. I picked up the Apex invoice for the heater that started the fire. They sold us a defective product to cause a crisis, I said. Then they offered the loan to solve the crisis. Then they used the loan to force the sale. It is brilliant. In a sick way, Avery muttered. They create the distress they specialize in relieving. We need to stop the clock, I said. The acceleration notice gives us 4 days. I need to pay them off. I left Avery building the timeline and drove to Harbor Pines Community Bank. It was a small, stately building on Main Street with marble floors and a smell of old money and floor wax. I asked to see Mr. Henderson, the branch president. He had given me my first savings account passbook when I was 6. Leah, he said, ushering me into his office. He looked genuinely happy to see me, which made what I had to ask harder. I heard you were back. I assumed you would be taking the reins at the marina. That is the plan, I said, sitting down. But we have a liquidity issue, a short-term bridge loan that we need to refinance, immediately. Mr. Henderson nodded, putting on his reading glasses. Your father has always been conservative with debt. I was surprised when I saw the UCC filing from Northbridge. You saw it? Small town. Leah, he said, we monitor the collateral of our long-term clients. I need to pay them off. I said, I am willing to personally guarantee a new loan. I have a salary history in Chicago, excellent credit, and I can pledge my own assets. The business has equity. The land alone is worth $2 million. Mr. Henderson looked at me, then at the Northbridge loan agreement I had placed on his desk. He flipped through it, his expression darkening. He stopped at page 14. He read it, then read it again. Leah, he said softly, I would love to help you. The marina is a pillar of this community, but I can't refinance this. Why not? I asked. The equity is there. Look at this clause, he said, turning the document toward me. Section 8.4. Prepayment penalty and lockout period. I read the dense legal text. Borrower may not prepay the principal, in whole or in part, for a period of 12 months from the execution of this note. Any attempt to prepay will trigger a penalty of 50% of the outstanding balance, plus all future interest calculated to maturity. I stared at the numbers. 50%. If you try to pay this off now, Mr. Henderson explained, you don't owe $450,000. You owe nearly $700,000. And that is if they even accept the payment. The lockout language suggests they can refuse prepayment entirely and simply foreclose on the collateral if a single covenant is missed. They designed it to fail, I whispered. They didn't want a bank to bail you out. Mr. Henderson said grimly, this isn't a loan. Leah, it is handcuffs. I walked out of the bank feeling the weight of the sky pressing down on me. They had thought of everything. They knew a local bank would try to step in, so they poisoned the well. I drove to the marina. The closed sign was flipped in the window. Even though it was Tuesday morning, my father hadn't opened the shop. I unlocked the door and went inside. The silence was eerie. The smell of diesel and oil, usually comforting, felt stagnant. I walked to the back, to the spot where the fire had started. The wall was still scorched black, the drywall patched but unpainted. I stood there, visualizing the layout. The heater had been mounted on the wall. Hey, Leah. I turned. It was Tom Gathers, the floor manager. He was sitting on a stack of tires, eating a sandwich. He shouldn't have been there if the shop was closed. But Tom came to work whether he was getting paid or not. Hey, Tom, I said, bad business. Huh? He said, gesturing around the empty shop. Yeah, I said. Tom, do you remember when the new heater was installed? Sure, he said. Last October, just before the cold snap. Did you install it? No. Tom said, I offered to. Told Dale I could wire it up in an hour, but the rep from the supply company insisted on doing it himself. Said it was a warranty requirement. The rep? I asked. From Apex? Yeah. Young guy. Slick. Wore boots that had never seen mud. Name was Carter. Carter. Tom took a bite of his sandwich. Weird thing was, he was real particular about where it went. I told him to put it near the bay doors, where the draft is. He said no. Said it had to go on the back wall. I looked at the back wall. It was right next to the chemical storage locker, where we kept the acetone and the paint thinner. He put an industrial heater next to the solvents? I asked. I told him it was a bad spot. Tom said. He said the unit was spark-free and the airflow was better there. Dale told me to let him do his job. I felt a cold rage burning in my chest. It wasn't negligence. It was arson by design. They placed a heat source next to an accelerant and waited for physics to do the rest. And Kendra? I asked. Was she around? Oh yeah, Tom said, chuckling darkly. She was following him around like a puppy, bringing him coffee, holding the flashlight. I think she had a little crush. I thanked Tom and went to find my sister. She was in the office, shredding paper. Not documents, just blank paper. She was feeding sheets into the shredder one by one, watching them turn into confetti. It was a nervous tick. Kendra, I said. She jumped. The shredder whirred and stopped. We need to talk about Carter, I said. Her face flushed a deep, painful crimson. Who? She squeaked. The rep from Apex. I said, the guy who installed the heater. Tom said you spent a lot of time with him. I helped him, she stammered. Kendra, I said, stepping closer. Did you like him? She looked down at her shoes. He was nice, she whispered. He listened to me. He asked about the business. He asked about my plans. Did he ask about the chemical locker? I asked. She frowned. He asked where we kept the flammables. He said he wanted to make sure the heater was safe. He was being careful. Leah, he wasn't being careful. I said. He was aiming. Kendra looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. He asked me out, she confessed, for coffee. We went twice. He told me I was too smart for this town. He told me I should be running the place, not Dad. He was grooming you, I said. He was pumping you for information and planting the idea that you should take over. So when Dad offered you the transfer, you were already primed to say yes. I thought he liked me. She sobbed. I reached out and took her hand. It wasn't comforting. It was anchoring. He used you. Kendra, he used your loneliness to burn our business down. She pulled her hand away and covered her face. I am so stupid, she wailed. You are not stupid, I said. You were targeted. There is a difference. But now you have to be angry. I left her crying in the office and went to find my father. He wasn't at the shop. He wasn't at the house. I found him at the cemetery. He was standing in front of his parents' grave. The granite stone was simple. Patterson. He was wearing his good coat. The wool one he wore to church. He looked like he was waiting for a bus. Dad, I said, walking up behind him. He didn't turn around. I failed them, he said, nodding at the stone. My father built this from nothing, a rowboat and a shed, and I lost it. You haven't lost it yet. I said, I tried to get a new loan. I told him. The bank said no. The contract blocks it. He nodded. I figured. Dad, I said, the text message, the spill. It is true, he said. I was 35. I was rushing. I hit the tank with the backhoe. It cracked. I panicked. And Calvin Rourke helped you dig it out? He was just a kid. Dale said, a summer hire. I paid him extra to keep his mouth shut. I thought he forgot. He didn't forget. I said, he banked it. He waited 30 years until he was in a position to use it. Why? He asked, turning to me. Why us? We are nobody. Leah, we are a small marina in a dying town. Why go to all this trouble? Because the land is zoned for deep water. I said, I looked it up. The Army Corps of Engineers just approved a dredging project for the harbor. This land is going to triple in value next year. Saltmere knows that. They aren't buying a boat shop. They are buying a future luxury condo development. He stared at me. Condos? They are going to bulldoze it. Dad, the shop, the house, everything. He swayed, and I grabbed his arm. I have to tell you something. He whispered, I know. I said, the oncology center. He looked at me, his eyes clear and terrified. It is pancreatic, he said. Stage 3. I felt the world stop. The wind died. The traffic noise faded. Oh, Dad, they said I have a chance, he said quickly. With surgery, chemo. But the surgery, it is expensive, and the recovery is long. I couldn't run the shop. So you tried to cash out, I said, to pay for the treatment. To leave your mother with something, he corrected. I thought if I sold it, even for a low price, I could put the money in a trust. If I died, she would be safe. You tried to die quietly, I said, tears stinging my eyes. You tried to solve it all by yourself so we wouldn't have to worry. I am the father, he said, his voice breaking. It is my job. It is not your job to be a martyr, I shouted, the grief exploding into anger. It is your job to be our father, to trust us. You trusted a stranger who sold you a bomb, but you wouldn't trust your own daughter with the truth? I was ashamed, he yelled back. I was ashamed that I was sick. I was ashamed that I was broke. I didn't want you to see me like this. I grabbed him by the lapels of his coat. I see you, I cried. I see you, Dad. And I love you. But you are an idiot. He crumbled then. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing into my shoulder. I held him, feeling the sharp blades of his shoulder blades through the wool. He was so thin. We stood there in the cemetery, surrounded by the dead, holding on to the wreckage of the living. When he finally pulled away, he wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. What do we do? He asked. We fight. I said, but we can't fight them with money. We have to fight them with noise. We went back to the house. Marilyn was waiting in the kitchen. She saw Dale's red eyes and my fierce expression, and she knew the secrets were out. She made tea. We sat at the table. We have to go public. I said, I am calling the Harbor Pines Business Association. I am scheduling a town hall. No, Marilyn said immediately. Mom, I said, we have no choice. They are blackmailing us. The only way to disarm blackmail is to take away the secret. You want to tell the town about the spill? She asked, horrified. No, I said, not the spill. The predatory lending. the fraud. We tell them that Northbridge is targeting local businesses. We show them the pattern. If we make enough noise, Saltmere will back off. They hate bad press. It kills their development deals. It will be a circus, Marilyn said. Everyone will know we are failing. Everyone already knows. I snapped. The employees know. The bank knows. The only people who don't know are the ones who might help us. Leah, please, she begged. Handle it quietly. Find a lawyer. Settle. There is no settlement. I slammed my hand on the table. They want everything. I looked at Dale. Dad, give me the authority. Sign the paper. Let me speak for the company. He looked at Marilyn, then at me. I can't, he whispered. Why? I asked. Just sign a power of attorney. He looked down at his hands. Because of the transfer clause, he said. I frowned. What transfer clause? When I signed the business over to Kendra, he said, his voice barely audible. Northbridge insisted on a stability clause to prevent frivolous changes in management during the transition. And it says no shares can be transferred to Leah Patterson without the written consent of the lender. I stared at him. They named me? He nodded. They put my name in the contract? Yes. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a generic restriction. It was a specific block. They knew I was the threat. They knew I was the one with the MBA, the one who would ask questions. And you signed it? I whispered. I didn't think you wanted it, he cried. Your mother said, stop listening to Mom, I shouted. I stood up, pacing the kitchen. They locked me out. Specifically me. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Calvin Rourke knew exactly who I was. Maybe he remembered me from when we were kids. Or maybe he had just done his homework. But it meant one thing. I couldn't be the owner. I couldn't be the manager. I was a legal ghost. Fine, I said. I stopped pacing. Fine? Marilyn asked. If I can't be the owner, I will be the whistleblower, I said. I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for the Harbor Pines Business Association. Who are you calling? Dale asked. Mrs. Higgins? I said. The president. Leah, don't. Marilyn warned. I hit send. Hello? Mrs. Higgins? This is Leah Patterson. Yes. Dale's daughter. I need to schedule an emergency meeting at the Marina Hall. Tomorrow night. Yes. It is about the future of the waterfront. No, it is not good news. I hung up. It is done. I said. Marilyn looked at me with ice in her eyes. You have disgraced us. I saved you. I said, you just don't know it yet. I spent the rest of the day printing flyers. Avery helped me distribute them. We put them in every shop window on Main Street. Is your business safe? Predatory lending in Harbor Pines. The truth about Northbridge. By evening, the town was buzzing. My phone was blowing up with texts from people I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. I went to bed early, exhausted. I needed to be sharp for tomorrow. I slept fitfully, dreaming of fire and rising water. I woke up at 3 a.m. There was a sound outside, a sharp hiss, like a snake. I got up and looked out the window. My car was parked in the driveway. A dark figure was crouching by the rear wheel. Hey! I screamed, banging on the glass. The figure stood up. He was wearing a hoodie. He looked up at my window. He didn't run immediately. He just stood there, looking at me. Then he turned and walked, not ran, down the driveway and disappeared into the night. I ran downstairs and out the front door. My car was listing to one side. I knelt by the tire. It wasn't just slashed. Someone had carved a word into the sidewall of the rubber. It was jagged and crude, but legible. Silence. I touched the rubber. The hiss I had heard was the air leaving the tire. My father came out on the porch, wrapping his robe around him. Leah, he called out. What is it? I stood up. I looked at the slashed tire. I looked at the dark street where the man had vanished. It wasn't a warning to stop. It was a warning that the rules of the game had changed. They weren't using lawyers anymore. They were using fear. They slashed my tires. Dad, I said. Dale gasped. Call the police. No, I said. Why not? Because that is what they want. I said, they want me to be scared. They want me to spend tomorrow filing a police report instead of standing on that stage. I walked back toward the house. I am not calling the police. I said, I am calling a tire shop. I walked past my father, into the kitchen. And Dad? He looked at me, pale and trembling. Find your best suit. I said, you are coming with me tomorrow, and you are going to tell them everything. The Marina Hall was a drafty, cavernous building that smelled of floor wax and old coffee. It was usually reserved for pancake breakfasts and Rotary Club meetings. But tonight, the air was thick with a tension that felt more like a courtroom than a community center. I stood at the podium, arranging my papers. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Below me, in the front row of the metal folding chairs, sat my family. Dale was wearing his best navy suit, the one he had bought for my college graduation. It hung loosely on his frame now, the shoulders slightly too wide, emphasizing how much weight he had lost. Marilyn sat next to him, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Kendra was on the other side, clutching a manila folder to her chest like a life preserver. Behind them, the room was filling up. I had expected 20 people, maybe 30, but the hall was packed. I saw faces I recognized from the grocery store, from the gas station, from high school. I saw the owner of the hardware store. I saw the manager of the local diner. I saw suppliers, mechanics, and fishermen. They weren't here for a show. They were here because they were scared. The flyers Avery and I had plastered all over town, "Is your business safe?" had struck a nerve. I checked the microphone. It gave a high-pitched whine of feedback that made the crowd wince. "Good evening," I said. My voice echoed in the hall. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't tell a joke to warm them up. I turned on the projector I had set up on a card table. A stark white beam of light hit the pull-down screen behind me. "My name is Leah Patterson." I said, "Most of you know my father, Dale. You know Patterson Marine. We have been a part of this harbor for 40 years. But tonight, I am not here to talk about boats. I am here to talk about math." I clicked the remote. A timeline appeared on the screen. 6 months ago, I said, pointing to the first date. A fire damaged our inventory. It was caused by a heater sold to us by a vendor called Apex Industrial Supply. I clicked again. A document appeared, the liability waiver. Apex required us to sign a waiver releasing them from damages caused by electrical faults. I continued. When the fire happened, our insurance claim was denied because the equipment was non-compliant. We were left with a $50,000 hole in our operating budget. The room was silent. I could hear the hum of the projector fan. 2 weeks later, I said, Patterson Marine was approached by a lender called Northbridge Capital Solutions. They offered a bridge loan to cover the loss and restock for the season. My father, facing a liquidity crisis, signed. I clicked again. The terms of the loan appeared, magnified. The interest rate was ostensibly 12%. I said, but if you look at the fees, the consulting charges, and the compulsory audits, the effective annual percentage rate was over 40%. A murmur went through the crowd. 40% was payday loan territory, not commercial banking. Then came the default. I said, the terms were designed to be impossible to meet during the off-season, and when the default happened, Northbridge didn't ask for payment. They asked for collateral. I clicked to the final slide, a map of the harbor. This is where it gets interesting, I said, keeping my voice cold and clinical. Patterson Marine sits on 3 acres of deep water frontage. 2 months ago, a developer called Saltmere Holdings drafted an acquisition agreement to buy our land for pennies on the dollar. I looked out at the audience. The registered agent for Apex Industrial Supply, the company that sold us the fire hazard, is the same as the registered agent for Saltmere Holdings, and the financing for Saltmere is provided by the parent company of Northbridge Capital. I let that sink in. They burn you down, I said. They lend you the water to put it out, and the price of the water is your land. The murmur in the room grew into a rumble of anger. I saw heads nodding. I saw people leaning over to whisper to their neighbors. Suddenly, the double doors at the back of the hall swung open. The sound was loud enough to silence the room. Everyone turned. A man walked in. He was flanked by two other men in dark suits, but he was the one who commanded attention. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my car. He had silver hair and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. It was Calvin Rourke. He didn't look like a blackmailer. He didn't look like a man who had slashed my tires. He looked like a senator. He walked down the center aisle, his shoes clicking on the linoleum. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at me. "Ms. Patterson," he said. His voice was smooth, projecting easily without a microphone. I stood behind the podium, gripping the edges. "Mr. Rourke," I said, "you are late." "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, stopping at the front of the room, just a few feet from where my parents were sitting. Dale refused to look at him. "But I thought we should clear up some misunderstandings before you accidentally slander a legitimate financial institution." He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands in a gesture of open benevolence. "Northbridge Capital helps distressed businesses," he said. "We provide capital when banks say no. We take risks on people like Dale Patterson. It is unfortunate that the business failed to perform. But airing private grievances in a public hall isn't the way to resolve a contract dispute." He turned back to me. "Leah," he said, dropping the formality, "why don't we step outside? I have a settlement offer prepared. We can forgive the penalty fees. We can work out a payment plan. There is no need for this." It was a classic move. Isolate and conquer. He was offering a lifeline to make me look unreasonable if I refused. He was betting that the scared daughter would take the deal and run. I looked at him. I looked at the settlement folder in his hand. "No," I said. The room went dead quiet. "I beg your pardon?" Rourke said, his smile tightening at the corners. I said no. I repeated, "We are done with private meetings. We are done with quiet settlements. If you have an offer, Mr. Rourke, you can make it right here, into the microphone." Rourke laughed, a dismissive, patronizing sound. "I can't discuss sensitive financial details in front of an audience." "Leah, that would be a breach of privacy." "Whose privacy?" I asked. "Ours or yours?" I picked up a stack of papers from the podium. "You see, Mr. Rourke, I didn't just rent a hall tonight. I spent the morning on the phone." I held up the papers. "This is a copy of the formal complaint I filed this afternoon with the State Attorney General's Office of Consumer Protection." I said. Rourke's eyes narrowed. "And this," I said, holding up another document, "is a request for an investigation filed with the Department of Financial Regulation, citing predatory lending practices and potential racketeering." I dropped the papers back onto the podium with a heavy thud. "You can't bully us quietly anymore." "Calvin," I said, "it is all on the record." Rourke's face changed. The smooth politician mask slipped, revealing something sharper, uglier underneath. "You are making a mistake," he said softly. "Filing false complaints is actionable. Ms. Patterson, we will defend our reputation aggressively." "Defend it then!" a voice shouted from the back of the room. I looked up. It was Stan Miller, the owner of the lumberyard on Route 9. He stood up, his face red. "I took a loan from you people last year," Stan shouted. "Same deal. High fees, short term. And when I tried to pay it off early, you hit me with a prepayment penalty that nearly bankrupted me." Stan sat down, shaking. Another man stood up. "A fisherman named Elias. They tried to buy my boat slip." Elias said, "Saltmere. They said if I didn't sell, the city would rezone the dock and I would lose it anyway." It started like a wave, one by one. People began to speak. A pattern emerged from the darkness of the hall. It wasn't just Patterson Marine. It was the bakery that closed last month. It was the auto body shop that mysteriously sold to a holding company. Rourke looked around the room. He wasn't smiling anymore. He realized he had walked into an ambush. He turned back to me, his eyes cold and hard. "This is a nice rally. Leah, he said, but it doesn't change the contract. Your father signed the note, the money is due, and no amount of shouting is going to stop the repossession. He looked down at Dale. Isn't that right? Dale? He asked. The threat was implicit. You talk, you lose the shop, and the EPA finds out. Dale was trembling. He looked small and fragile in his chair. Marilyn reached out and took his hand, squeezing it hard. I held my breath. This was the moment. I could fight Rourke, but I couldn't fight for my father. He had to stand up. Dale? Rourke prompted, his voice laced with venom. Tell your daughter to stand down. Tell her about the history of the property. Dale looked at Rourke. Then he looked at me. He saw the fear in my eyes, but he also saw the defiance. He saw the daughter who had come back to save him. Even after he had pushed her away, Dale stood up. He was shaky on his legs. He buttoned his suit jacket with trembling fingers. He didn't look at Rourke. He walked up the 3 steps to the stage. He came to the podium. I stepped aside, giving him the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, his friends, his customers. I lied, Dale said. His voice was a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. I lied to you, he said, stronger this time. I told everyone the business was doing fine. I told you the transfer to Kendra was just succession planning. He looked at Kendra, who was wiping tears from her face. It wasn't. He said, I was broke. I was sick. He took a deep breath. I have pancreatic cancer, he said. A collective gasp went through the room. I didn't want anyone to know. Dale continued. I was ashamed. I thought if I could just sell the business, I could leave my wife with enough money to survive. I thought I was protecting them. He turned to look at Rourke, but I wasn't protecting them. He said, I was hiding. I let this man threaten me. He told me he knew about a mistake I made 30 years ago, an accident, and he said if I didn't sell to Saltmere, he would destroy my name. Dale's voice cracked, but he didn't stop. Well, go ahead. Calvin, he said, destroy it. Tell them about the spill. Tell them I was a scared kid who made a mistake. But you are not going to take my family's future. Not today. He slammed his hand on the podium. I admit it, he shouted. I took the loan. I hid the truth. But I am not hiding any more. The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of support. People stood up, clapping, shouting his name. Rourke looked furious. His leverage had just evaporated. The secret was out, and the town didn't care about a 30-year-old spill. They cared about the dying man standing tall against a predator, but we weren't done. Kendra stood up. She walked to the stage, carrying her manila folder. She looked terrified, but she walked past Rourke without flinching. She came to the projector. I have something too, she said into the microphone. Her voice was high and thin, but clear. She placed a document on the projector bed. I found this in my email. She said, I was forwarded an email chain by mistake from the rep at Apex. The document appeared on the screen. It was an email from Calvin Rourke to Apex Industrial Supply. Subject, Project Anchor Timeline. Date, September 2025. Team, ensure the unit is installed by October 15th. We need the thermal event to occur before the winter heating season to maximize distress. Insurance denial is prearranged with the adjuster. The room went silent again. This wasn't just predatory lending. This was conspiracy to commit arson. Thermal event. That was the corporate euphemism for burning down a family business. Rourke's face drained of color. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. That is a fabrication, he snapped. It is a printout with the header information, Kendra said, and I have the digital original on the laptop. Suddenly, a voice boomed over the speakers. Leah! It was Sonia, my lawyer. I had her on speakerphone, resting on the podium. Sonia? I asked. Make sure everyone understands that these are allegations. Sonia's sharp voice cut through the room. We are not accusing Mr. Rourke of arson in a court of law yet. We are simply presenting evidence that suggests a conflict of interest and bad faith dealing. She was protecting us from a defamation suit. But the damage was done. The court of public opinion had already reached a verdict. I stepped back to the microphone. We have the emails. Calvin, I said, we have the timelines. We have the witness testimony from the community. And tomorrow, the Attorney General will have it all too. Rourke stared at me. He looked around the room. Realizing he had lost control of the narrative, he couldn't silence a whole town. He smoothed his tie. He regained his composure with chilling speed. Very well, he said. You have made your point. You have rallied the troops. He pulled a document from his inside pocket. But the law is not a popularity contest. Leah, the law is written on paper. He walked up the steps and placed the document on the podium in front of me. This is a notice of acceleration and immediate repossession, he said. I looked at the paper. By publicly declaring insolvency and admitting to fraud regarding the insurance claim, which your father just did, you have triggered the immediate default clause. The 14-day grace period is void. He checked his watch. You have 48 hours to pay the full balance of $450,000. If the funds are not wired by close of business Thursday, we will enter the premises and remove the collateral, the lifts, the tools, the inventory. He leaned in close to the microphone, his voice echoing through the stunned hall. You want a war. Leah, you have one. You have 2 days to find $500,000, or Patterson Marine ceases to exist. He turned and walked out of the hall. His 2 suits followed him. The silence he left behind was heavy. The victory of the exposure felt suddenly hollow. We had exposed them, yes, but we hadn't stopped them. In fact, we had accelerated the execution. Dale sank into a chair on the stage, his energy spent. Marilyn went to him, holding him as he wept quietly. The crowd was confused. They started to murmur. What happens now? Can they do that? I looked at the notice. 48 hours. Mr. Henderson, the banker, walked up to the stage. He looked grim. Leah, he said quietly, I can't lend you the money. Not with that notice filed. The risk is too high. The regulators would have my head. I know. I said, so that is it? Kendra asked, her voice trembling. We lose? I looked at my family. My dying father, my scared mother, my sister who had finally found her courage. No, I said, we don't lose. I turned to Mr. Henderson. You said you couldn't lend to the business because of the lien. I said, that is correct. But what if you didn't lend to the business? I asked. What if you lent to me? To you? I have a 401k. I said, I have equity in my Chicago condo. I have savings, and I have an offer letter from a competitor of my logistics firm that includes a signing bonus. It wasn't $500,000, but it was close. If I liquidate everything, I said, if I sell the condo, if I cash out the retirement, I can put together $300,000. It is not enough, Henderson said. You are short. I looked at the crowd. I am short. I agreed. But I am betting on this town. I grabbed the microphone again. Listen to me, I shouted. Rourke thinks he won. He thinks that because he has a contract, he can take our livelihood. He gave us 48 hours. I looked at the faces in the crowd. I am putting up everything I have. I said, my home, my retirement, my future. I am putting $300,000 on the table to pay off this loan. A gasp went through the room. But I am short, I said. I need $150,000. I looked at Stan Miller. I looked at Elias. I am not asking for a donation. I said, I am asking for an investment. I am asking you to buy into Patterson Marine, not as customers, as partners. If we let Northbridge take our shop, they will come for yours next. They will rezone this whole waterfront until there is nothing left but condos for people who don't live here. I pointed to the screen, where the Northbridge logo still glowed. We stop them here, I said, or we don't stop them at all. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, Stan Miller stood up. I will put in $10,000, he said. It is my equipment fund, but I would rather give it to you than let those vultures take it later. I will put in $5,000, Elias said. I can do $2,000. the diner manager shouted. It started to snowball. People were walking to the stage, pulling out checkbooks, pledging amounts. It was chaotic. It was desperate. It was beautiful. Mr. Henderson stood next to me, frantically writing down names and amounts on a notepad. We are getting close, he whispered. We are at 100,000. But the momentum slowed. We were tapped out. The town was not rich. These were working people. We were still 50,000 short. I looked at the tally. We were going to fail. We were going to come up short, and Rourke was going to win. Then, I heard a voice. I have 50,000. I turned. It was Marilyn. My mother was standing on the stage, holding her purse. She looked at Dale, then at me. Marilyn? Dale whispered. We don't have that kind of money. I do, she said. She opened her purse and pulled out a small, worn bank book. It was my mother's inheritance money, she said, her voice steady. From when Grandma died, I never touched it. I was saving it. For what? I asked. For a rainy day, she said, or for a wedding, or for a grandchild. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of love and resignation. I was saving it for you, Leah, she said, for when you finally settled down, but I suppose saving the business is the same thing. She handed the book to Mr. Henderson. Take it, she said. Mr. Henderson did the math. That puts us over, he said. With Leah's liquidation and the community pledges, we have the 450. We had the money. I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't cry yet. There was one more thing I had to do. I turned to my father. He was sitting in the chair, looking at the checkbook his wife had just handed over. He looked humbled, broken open. Dad, I said. He looked up at me. We have the money. I said, we can pay them off. We can kick Northbridge out. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you. Lee, thank you. But, I said, the room went quiet again. I am not doing this as a favor. Dad, I am not doing this as a daughter. I am doing this as an investor. I pulled a document from my folder. It wasn't a Northbridge document. It was one I had drafted with Sonia earlier that day. This is an operating agreement. I said, it transfers majority control of Patterson Marine Supply to me. It gives me 51% of the voting shares. It grants me full executive authority over all financial decisions. And I took a deep breath. And it requires your immediate resignation as CEO. Dale stared at me. The crowd watched, breathless. You can stay on as founder, I said. You can work the floor. You can talk to the customers. But you are done with the money. Dad, you are done with the contracts, and you are going to focus on getting well. I held out the pen. I am saving the business, I said, but I am taking it over. If you want Northbridge gone, you have to let me lead. Dale looked at the paper. He looked at the marina he had built. He looked at the mess he had made. He stood up. He took the pen. He didn't hesitate. He didn't argue. You are tough. Leah, he whispered, tougher than I ever was. He signed the paper. He handed it back to me. It is yours, he said. I took the agreement. I felt the weight of it in my hand. It wasn't a prize. It was a burden. I had spent my life savings. I had leveraged my future. I had taken on a failing business, a sick father, and a town that was banking on me to save them. I turned to the microphone one last time. Mr. Henderson, I said, wire the money. I looked at the camera at the back of the room, imagining Calvin Rourke watching the feed. Tell Rourke to bring his truck. I said, he can pick up his check, but he is not taking a single bolt from this shop. The crowd erupted again. A deafening roar of relief and triumph. I didn't smile. I just looked at my sister, and my mother, and my father. We were still standing, battered, bruised, and poorer than we had ever been. But we were standing. The war for Patterson Marine was over, but the work of rebuilding it had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Writing Leah's journey, from the shock of betrayal to the hard-won victory at Marina Hall, has been an intense experience. and I hope you felt every moment of the tension and the triumph. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a bustling city like Leah's Chicago, or a quiet coastal town like Harbor Pines? Please let me know in the comments below. And share your thoughts on the story. Did Dale deserve redemption? Did Leah make the right choice? If you enjoyed this series, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, family drama, and turning the tables coming your way. Until next time.